next we're going to have a very dear old friend, Jim Davis, who passed on not long ago. I don't know why. I called him from Mexico, and as we started talking about his life, he gives us his whole life story, and then he dies shortly thereafter. And this is a man that I knew from the Wittenberg Center in Woodstock, or Wittenberg, which is part of Woodstock, where they always did events and attended events as well with Native Americans. I worked with them at the United Nations, at the mall in Washington, D.C., at the Cathedral, St. John of the Divine. Jim was always taping, I was always taping or filming, and we were good buddies. And so this is the story of Jim's life. And it blew my mind, because he didn't even know he was a Native American when he was a little kid. They were hiding that out here in Kerhonkson. So let's just hear Jim and I talking about his life. So you have some Native roots, right? What is that, for starters?
That's what my paternal grandfather told my sisters and I in the late 60s. He sat us down one day and fessed up. And he straight out said why he hadn't told us there. Before that, even then in the late 60s, he was still scared that we'd get stolen and taken to a boarding school.
Ah.
As a kid, he was hidden out.
Even at upstate New York.
His mother passed away when he was but 9 years old. And they lived way out in what's now part of the Shokan Reservoir, Winchell's Corners.
Okay.
That section of the reservoir. Moon Hall, Winchell's Corners.
Yeah.
About 1,000-acre farm. And when his mom passed away, his father packed him off with some older sisters to finish elementary school, and then they just kept hiding him out and sending him further and further away, where, if he had gotten caught and they found out that his mother was a blood, they wouldn't have sent him off to the Carlisle Indian School in Pennsylvania. They kept him in downtown Kingston and Oneonta and a couple other, Tannersville.
They raised him as a white man anyway, pretty much.
Exactly.
So what were the Indian roots? What were you, Lenape?
His mother and grandmother were Long Ears.
Long Ears.
Boyceville, Shokan, and Long Ear is a Lenape last name.
I didn't know that. I know
That's
that
one
road.
of the things that Judy Abbott and I discovered many years ago, was that there were a couple of surnames that were code. Redmond, anybody that lives back up in the hills with the last name of Redmond,
That makes sense.
chances are their ancestors were local Lenapes, and were friendly enough, got along with everybody, that the census takers just gave them that Anglo-sounding last name. Yeah, well, you're a Redskin, but you're a peaceful, Christianized Redskin. We like having you as a neighbor. We are not going to call you Titsaklau, then. We're going to call you Redmond.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And the same with Long Ear. Long Ear.
Yeah.
They were things that denoted Lenape characters.
It came out of Long Ear. Long Ear became long.
Many of them had very long earlobes.
Okay.
Along with the high cheekbones, and good tan by April. Well, when my father passed away, people come over to visit Mom down in Florida at their Florida house. One of the gals that Dad went to the one-room schoolhouse with in Kerhonkson straight out told my sister Martha, she says, "Oh yeah, as kids, K through 12, we all knew that your Aunt Jane and your father were Indian. It was as plain as the night and day. They had a, nut brown tan by the second week in April."
Yeah.
And Martha's like, yeah, that's a family tradition among most of us. And she said, well, that's the reason why Richie Davis was nicknamed Whitey in elementary school. And Martha goes, what? She said, well, yeah. They nicknamed Richie Davis Whitey Davis because he was no blood kin of yours, and he was library-based white his whole life. if he stayed out in the sun, he turned bright pink, you know, and sunburned badly. But they were best friends, and yeah, that was quite a joke in elementary school. Whitey Davis, and then there's Bill and Jane.
But there was no traditional thing going on in your family.
No, they hid it. They hid the shit out of it.
I understand. Yeah.
And I also, you know, having not found a marriage certificate on file for my great-grandfather's fourth wife, my great-grandmother, I think he just lived with the housekeeper when wife number 3 died. He just made 2 or 3 more kids with the housekeeper and never did marry her. And the housekeeper, the hired hand, was part Indian. I think that was another big reason they kept shut up about it. Big family secret. They were bastards.
Yeah. Like so many of even Thomas Jefferson did that. So many people.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, and another thing that happened a whole lot that has never been spoken of very much was all the plagues. You know, diphtheria and whooping cough and cholera, all these things that would take a whole family out.
Yeah.
Or most of a family. And it was so casual. Adoption back in those days was so casual that, you know, neighbors would take in neighbors.
Wow.
If mom and dad and 2 kids died and there's 3 kids left in the family, the next door neighbors would just move them right in and never say shit about it. Nothing, never do anything formal, never put it in writing. It's just, well, okay, they're gone. Of course, the kids are going to live with us. If any relatives come and want to take them, well, so be it. But until then, they'll stay with us.
So this was the nature of that community that you were raised in, that it was kind of, I don't want to...
Yeah, even in my day, Nathan, in the 50s, we had next-door neighbors that were part Indian, and they raised, 6 or 7 kids that were not their own. They don't think they could have kids, but they just kept taking in foster kids and raising them all the way up through high school and marriage. They had, locals knew the Green family to be local native in origin. And since then, I've gotten so much verbal confirmation from that. There's a famous family in the back hills of Sampsonville, the Courtrights. The Greens were related to the Courtrights, and the Courtrights were related to the Conklins, and they were all local Indian. And the Conklins used to swear up and down that they were Cherokee. Well, I finally, sometime in the early 90s, the last of the Conklin men took me to what they believed to be an Indian graveyard in Kerhonkson with a couple Vietnam veterans, because they thought it might have been a warrior's burial mound. And yeah, we got to Turkey Hill and listening to Lauren's story about these Cherokee that would come up every fall around equinox time, Cherokee New Year time, Rosh Hashanah.
Wait a
minute.
4 to 6 of them. 4 to 6 of them dressed by...
No, he's just saying it's that time. It's the new year of the Cherokee.
Yeah, but maybe
So he's just trying to make it sound like familiar to us.
They do it at the exact same time of year as Rosh Hashanah.
Right.
Well, Alf Evers gave us a book on the Choctaw, okay, and they had Hebrew words in their language.
Right, but this is something else. That's
Yeah,
not
they
what-
know.
Yeah.
They know that they're part of the 12 lost tribes.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay.
Well, Lauren went and showed us these 2 big burial mounds. After all the Vietnam vets had introduced themselves to one another, that was a whole other thing. That took a while. And the Miccosukee Indian woman that was along on the entourage, she started recognizing medicine plants and 2 trees from way down south. And she asked me specifically, Jim, she said, you born and raised in these hills. Do you see any of those 2 trees right there that are so huge, big around, and have bark that looks like alligator skin? You ever see any of them? I go, no. Those are the first 2 I've ever seen. And she said, those are tupelo trees. They don't generally come this far north.
Mm-hmm. So they were
People
transplanted.
They planted them on purpose as a memorial to the southern Indians that are buried underneath these piles of rocks.
Okay.
And what we kind of figured out, we've got no proof of this, but we sussed out that perhaps they were all part of the Underground Railroad and got wiped out all at the same time. It's either that or they got involved in the Revolutionary War or the Underground Railroad.
So Indians were part of the Underground Railroad? I mean, I thought that was...
We're not sure, but the Cherokee were very, very instrumental in accompanying runaway slaves from down there to up here.
Oh, good, yeah.
And handing them off to the Shinnecock or the Abenaki or Mohawks or somebody else to get them all the rest of the way up to Canada.
Right.
But when they hit Long Island, they'd turn around and go back and pick up another bunch of runaway slaves.
Yeah.
And
that's interesting.
That led us to believe that some of these families that thought they were Cherokee were probably accurate. They're Cherokees that had come along with runaway slaves and fell in love with the area and married local people and just never went back to Cherokee territory.
Yeah. So how about your own life? What was it like growing up out near Kerhonkson in this kind of community of people who are almost related in some way? They take the children and
Well, Nathan, I've talked about that recently to a lot of people. It was old school, and almost idyllic. We had family farm that was pretty nearly self-sufficient, like 85% self-sufficient. And when that topic of the future of agriculture comes up, I said, well, it takes so many man-hours of work to be self-sufficient that most newcomers don't realize you've got to have a huge family, an extended family, and there's always more work to be done. And one of the things that made it still work into the 50s and early 60s was work parties.
Right.
We'd come back from the garden after picking whatever was ready. And if it was something real labor intense like shell peas or lima beans, where you'd have to sit around and shell them, get them out of the pods for quite a while after you picked them, the neighbors would come over and we'd all sit on the big front wraparound porch and have cocktails and shell peas or shell beans or, get them prepped for Mom to freeze or can the excess. Dinner's being cooked at the same time. So sometimes the neighbors would even stay for dinner. But yeah, you could go through 3 or 4 bushels of stuff that needed to be processed when you had 8, 10 people all working on it.
Right.
And having a good time and socializing, and it just, it was part of the social fabric of the community.
And the community was somewhat self-sufficient, was it? I mean, did they have to really...
Well, no, everybody else worked. We were the ones with the big garden, Nathan. We were the ones with the Victorian house and wraparound porch. And nobody got more than 2 channels on freaking TV, so
right.
Between the time you got off your day job and when it was dinner time, there wasn't a lot to do except watch.
And we pause there to say you're listening to the Woodstock Museum Show here on WIOF-LP Woodstock 104.1 on your FM tuner. And you're listening to The Wait, Jim Davis, being interviewed by Nathan Koenig.
News from Albany,
Right.
Do you think people were more vegetarian then, just because they were living off the land? And
no, I wouldn't. No? I wouldn't say that by any matter of means.
I wouldn't either.
Although Shelley, that did kind of that was a side effect of rationing for World War I and World War II. Was they had meat rations and fat rations, and the people that stayed home and weren't soldiers, they did not eat meat 2-3 times a day like we do nowadays. You would get a ration, and you'd get just so much beef, just so much pork per week, and that was it.
Well, also the animals...
It might not even be on the grocery store shelves because it was on its way to Europe or the South Pacific, part of the war effort.
Yeah. Well, my relatives were also dairy farmers, and predominantly they were always chickens. Certainly the eggs, and of course fowl at some point. The chicken got old, became chicken soup, but they never really ate a lot of meat. It was just because they still were living and surviving mostly off the land.
Yeah, it was a luxury.
Yeah.
Kind of something special.
Yeah. Well, what I'm thinking about is then and now. That things are shifting big time in the economy right now. There's a lot of problems with that. And I keep thinking, from what I've seen in our trips to Australia, that part of the big solution is understanding that you back to the land, creating your own food supplies, depending a lot less on the big multinational shopping centers and more on the local production for whatever you can do. It's part of the solution, not supporting the beast.
I believe that 120%, Nathan. And
one way to get rid of the beast is not to support it and to kind of starve it, which is the difficult thing. But
more small and medium-sized farms is definitely the answer.
Absolutely,
these huge, big agribiz multi-crop monocultures are the worst thing ever devised by man, except for the atomic bomb.
Right. Explain that a little bit. For those who want
because they're in the long run they're short-lived. Right. It is so antithetical.
They're destroying the land. They're destroying the land. They're poisoning the earth and that kind of thing.
To grow the same thing year after year after year after year in the same place is just wrong for a whole list of reasons.
Right. Sure. Of course.
And family farms didn't do that. You just knew to move your growing fields around and rotate your crops. Don't grow the same thing year after year after year in exactly the same spot unless it's a permaculture thing.
Yeah, I just finished editing a scene in Australia. It's one of the final scenes in the series on Woodstock Sister Village, and it's satellites around that town are all these intentional communities that have lasted just about 50 years now, instead of falling apart after 3 to 5 like they did in the U.S. These communities, cooperatives, collectives, they got all kinds of, variations on the theme of how families and extended families, woofers and whatever can come together. And so I asked these people, what do you think will happen when it hits the fan, man? And they say, no worries, mate. We've got our survival situations together on these communities. They don't even have to pay much tax. It's all shared land, and there's many different variations on the theme. The star of our piece is a kid we knew when he was 3 years old, and now he's co-teaching as well as being a student at the Permaculture Center, the school. And
Nathan, I need you to talk a little slower. I don't hear that fast.
Oh, okay. All right. So our star of this piece is the last hour is his tour that he gave us around the Permaculture Center, that because of these hippies that started these alternative communities and demanded permaculture, and knew Mollison and the creators of that whole science, at least the ones that brought it into our times, they know everything about what you can do to make the land better instead of worse, and to incorporate everything from your waste systems to your animals to the wild animals and to everything in the area to maximize what you can do with the land without destroying it. And so we're really happy to see that.
They've done a much better job of teaching their children and their grandchildren.
Right. That's
than
what we're
most
seeing.
folks I've observed here in America.
That's right.
Sure.
I attribute it partly because they understand something that Americans don't quite get. That's just my theory about it, but I guess I'm not alone. But that you have to make decisions not just for the me and the me, but for the benefit of all the welfare of the future generations, for your children, their children. You make decisions about the land and how to treat it and what to grow and all these things, based on how it benefits the whole. So they learn how to reach consensus for the good of all in their decision making in quite a few of these communities.
Well, I certainly saw more white people doing that in Australia than I have anywhere else.
Right. Okay. So you saw some of these communities in Australia. I mean, they've got a lot of play. I mean, there's been great like PBS radio series on these communities and how successful they've been, and we've shot quite a few of them. Those are quite a few scenes we have on those. This young man who's teaching the permaculture was raised on the edge of the rainforest, right at the bottom of his garden is rainforest. And so they even understand what the bush tucker is that the Aboriginals taught, which they use for their food and medicine for, 60,000 years. So not only do they have that, but they have, the Western food and things and the permaculture concept behind it. So yeah, they're going to be pretty good. They might not be able to afford going out to dinner in town because the town got upscale, kind of like a Woodstock. It's going in that direction, but they can survive off the land and have their own trade, going on between these communities. They have these wonderful fairs, and every week in the towns and every month in the larger communities. So these are the alternatives that, I don't know, what can I say? The hippies were right, but we never went that far in our country. But these things work, and they're going to work better, and they're going to keep a lot of people going. And it's good to see. That's what.
I have a problem with the academic world that doesn't teach enough about people being intuitive and using logic, their own logic. Before Mollison went ahead and started introducing the idea of permaculture in an academic form, by the way, simply because most people learn going to school instead of the intuitive way, you had to go on a property, kind of camp out before you started building, learning to look which way the sun comes up, which way it goes down.
Right. Yeah.
How the winds are coming your direction, which does change, there's no question about it, how the rains fall, and study what's there first. And frankly, that's the intuitive way. It came from your own education of living in nature as part of
not
the
being
universe.
In the classroom.
Academic worlds take you out of that. And that is a problem. Instead of experiencing home living, which is going to happen again because many of these schools are not prepared to handle children back in school. Parents are going to start homeschooling, and they might as well teach them back to the land because a lot of it will be that. Now that families are home, they're going to have to get gardens together, fix their own car. And it seems to me that was the way it was before they got this whole idea that education outside of the house was so important. It's not as important as survival skills.
No, a lot of the education outside the house is education. What is this education? They're
Academia?
trying to program you and brainwash you into blindly accepting a system which is falling apart right in front of us.
Well, before that, the very wealthy did not have public education. They wanted people to be robots and just work for them. Capitalism is based a lot on someone's got to work for somebody else so that they can make money, okay? They work, they get paid a certain limited amount, and the rest of the money can go into the pockets of these wealthy patrons. So really, education is going to go back to what it was. It's going to be homeschooled,
Practical.
practical,
Yeah,
survival skills.
Yeah, of course.
By the way, how close are you to High Falls from Cahonkson?
Well, I'm not in Cahonkson.
No, I know, but when you
yeah.
were growing up,
Oh, it's about 15, 18 miles.
okay. Because I mentioned before, but just today I got an internet Facebook friend, which is really my relative, Joyce Rappaport, who grew up in High Falls on the farm, my great uncle Gerson's farm. He died at 103, so we know he lived a very simple life. Good food, hard work, and clean living kept him alive and kept everybody in our family who kept coming over from Europe alive. And I just found out when the family farm was broken up that Archie Rappaport and Malka, his wife, they set up a bungalow colony for Yiddish writers. And each one in the family did something amazing with that property.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They
Because
were dairy farmers, weren't they? Pretty
yes.
much? Yeah.
Yes.
Eggs and chickens?
Well, no, they didn't sell eggs. They just sold milk.
Ah, okay.
The eggs were for the use of everybody to eat at the
Oh,
farm.
okay, they weren't selling.
Okay,
Yeah,
they
but
were not
farmed them.
selling.
Yeah.
They farmed that.
Yeah.
They didn't even kill the chickens.
Yeah.
It was when that's why I used the word foul. When the chicken got too old and it kind of like went on its own, then it became soup, chicken soup.
Ah. Yeah.
It was the cure for menopause. When a chicken hits menopause, it's time for the soup pot.
Yep.
Oh, yeah. Is that how they figure
Yeah.
out?
No, that is.
Stops laying eggs.
Yeah,
It's-
stops
Oh,
laying
yeah.
eggs.
Okay, so it's not, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's a bunch of them running around here, you know.
I think that that's an important mainstay
They use 'em.
if you don't mind eating eggs, which is vegetarian. If it doesn't walk or crawl, vegetarians eat it. It's not vegan. And it's a protein, and it's one way, another, that you can do it in a small area. So it's a good farming animal.
So, what else, Jim, do you want to tell us about the good old days out in Kerhonkson that we haven't covered?
Did you have many pigs that you were raised with?
Many what?
Pigs?
Pigs.
We raised 3 a year for the extended family.
Mm-hmm. They're
And,
very
you know,
loving animals.
Cousin Philip would get them at, shortly after they were weaned, and had a special little indoor-outdoor pen for them. So they'd get, instead of compost piles, all 3 households would take their compostables over to the pig barn and throw all the kitchen scraps every other day or so over the fence to the pigs to supplement their corn mash that they got on a daily basis, and whatever they could get free range inside the enclosure of the pen. And it's amazing what pigs will eat. I saw them one time kill a 3-foot-long corn snake, just stomp it to death and rip it in half and eat it.
Oh, gee, yeah.
Wow.
So pigs are not necessarily vegetarians. If they can find some meat
No, they'll eat human,
and
everything.
kid, they'll
Yeah.
eat it.
They'll eat each other. Not
Yeah.
alive, but they will,
Yeah. Once
Yeah.
when I was driving out west, I saw a bunch of pigs on the side of the road, and I tossed them some ham just to see. They went right for it. They loved the ham.
Yeah.
We thought that was pretty funny.
Well, somebody once said that, in their eyes, pig was given as a major food supplier to feed a lot of people.
Yeah. They say it tastes something like human. I don't know much about it, but
I've never eaten human, but
I
I
have
do
heard
like.
that they down in Hawaii. They said that that's the main reason that they started raising pigs was to
wean them off humans.
be able to give up cannibalism.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Pork tasted just like human being, and as long as you had to have a little something for your luau, it might as well be a pig rather than somebody from the next village over.
Mm-hmm.
So how, Jim, how did you get out of this cannibalistic lifestyle? No, I'm just kidding. What? You were a farm boy. You were, a country farm boy, and then all of a sudden you went into different levels of society. You became quite sophisticated. You were shooting a lot of film, and you were in rarefied atmosphere in the cities and when did this...
what really transitioned me, Nathan, was getting a job that required more education.
Mm-hmm.
And I saw an ad while I was living out in New Mexico for a beginning, low-level, entry-level surveying and engineering job. And all right, they needed a grunt on the crew to do the grunt work. And of course I qualified for that. And you needed to know how to run a chainsaw and field strip it, keep it running no matter what.
Mm-hmm.
I certainly qualified. But I was there a couple of weeks, and my foreman was like, Jim, I'm going to train you to take over for me. And I'm like, bull you are. I suck at math. He goes, no, in the next few weeks, I'm going to teach you how to do my job. And it did come to pass that he taught me all the trigonometry. All the trigonometry and geometry that I refused to learn in high school. And it was real simple. I mean, he had a handheld calculator that did scientific mathematical formulas for geometry and trigonometry, and it was a beastly hot day in New Mexico, and he pointed to a 200-foot tall ponderosa pine tree, and he says, here's your choice, Jim. Today, you either learn how to do the trigonometry so that we go around the tree, or here's the chainsaw. You're going to have to cut it up and get it out of my way. And I'm like, so that's a Hewlett-Packard handheld computer, huh? And a cosine, show me what the cosine and cotangent is, and we'll start punching some numbers here, Craig. And 8 months later, I had his job. He wanted to leave, and leave in a good way.
Mm-hmm.
So he was creating a replacement for himself. And
sure. And where was this?
While I was learning all that trigonometry and geometry that I refused to learn in school, I could sense, sometimes even olfactory sense, the presence of my grandfathers, my biological grandfathers, looking down on me and assisting me in whatever way they could, from the spirit world.
You felt a connection to the spirit world while you were doing this?
Yeah, because two out of my 4 great-grandfathers were educated and knew mathematics, and my mother's father had been an engineer, was in the engineering corps in the Army, and he finished the West Wing on the Museum of Natural History in Manhattan in the 20s.
Oh, okay.
So he was that level of construction management and engineering. And boy, did it ever make him feel good that little Jimmy was finally learning to do something big and important like he used to do.
Like even discovering that math can be practical instead of what you learn in school. I mean, there's so much.
Exactly, Nathan. That was my biggest problem. Anytime I asked a math teacher, what do I need to learn this crap for?
Right.
They couldn't give me an answer good enough to make it sound interesting enough for me to apply myself and really get on the stick.
Yeah.
But that one crew chief showing me with 2 triangles drawn in the sand how I could save the life of a 200-year-old majestic tree, and all day of working my fingers to the bone and sweating like a horse. It was like, oh, and in 20 minutes we can do enough math to save 5 hours of running the chainsaw and cutting that thing up into little bitty pieces. And he goes, that's right.
Wow.
And that's when trigonometry got real interesting.
I guess geometry might have something to do with it too. I mean, could we actually find practical uses for geometry, angles and ways to
make a
tree fall or whatever. Yeah.
That too. When my high school geometry teacher said, well, someday you might have to know how big a tank to order to hold 1,500 gallons of water. And I was like, yeah, when pigs fly.
Oh, you just have to get a 1,500-gallon tank, right?
Yeah, why would I be buying a 1,500-gallon tank to hold anything?
Right.
Well, yeah, then I learned with geometry you can calculate all kinds of important need-to-know things.
Right.
Yeah, it changed my world.
Yeah.
When I came back from out west, funny story about Mom, I came back from out west after being gone many years, and I'm staying with my sister at my grandma's house, and Mom's like, well, you're never going to find a job around here. We're in another, depression-like era. There's no jobs to be had. You're going to end up being a prison guard like your father.
When's this?
And I was like, oh,
70s?
mid-'80s.
80s.
Mid-'80s, after the first .com bust or whatever.
Oh, okay. Oh, yeah.
The very next day, she said, where are you going so early in the morning? I said, off to work. I picked up the little Napanock newspaper, all 6 pages.
Yeah.
And sure enough, they were looking for a survey crew chief, and I was their guy for the next 3.5 years.
So you were a surveyor too?
My mother just couldn't get over it. There were 2 job on ads, and you had the skills to become a survey crew chief? And I was like,
wow.
Well, yeah.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, that's some of what I learned while I was gone. I wasn't just smoking dope and partying the whole time I was gone.
Well, where'd you go out west? Where'd you go? Late, early 80s?
I went to far west Texas and worked in the oil fields for a year and a half. During the OPEC embargo, remember the odd and even days at the gas pumps?
Yes, I do.
Big alleged shortage?
Yeah.
Well, the work was fast and furious out there, and even knowing nothing about oil wells, I was able to get a job the very first day I hit town, and went with somebody from here that had been there for a year already and going back from vacation. And yeah, they chase you around town. They needed help so bad.
Oh, gee. And what brought you to Texas?
67 days without a day off.
Why did you choose
Texas.
To go to Texas? You were looking for the opportunities?
Because that's where the oil wells were, and there were just more jobs than people.
Okay, so you went for the
work. There were no places to live, but there were lots and lots of work. And oh my God, the first paycheck I got, I looked at the size of that, and I was like, holy moly, the biggest paycheck I'd ever seen in my life.
All right. So you spent a year a little more out there.
Of course, it's dirty, stinky, nasty, dangerous work with a bunch of really, really unpleasant rednecks, mostly.
Right. They must.
And my first vacation, I went to New Mexico and just found this beautiful, beautiful town right next to the Mescalero Apache Reservation. Put it up for a vote, and it was unanimous. The family says, yes, we're going to go home, we're going to pack, we're going to move here.
Oh, gee. The family?
And, well, my son and girlfriend.
Oh, okay. So they went with you when you went out west. I see. Okay.
Oh yeah. Well, that was half of why I went.
Yeah.
I was in the beginnings of a divorce, and it looked very much like my ex was going to pack up and move to Florida and take the kid with her. So
yeah.
I just beat her to the punch and packed up and left and took the kid with me.
Yeah. I guess they didn't have the same laws back then. You can't go.
Oh, anywhere. They did. It was considered custodial interference because we had a separation agreement with joint custody. So yeah, I was breaking the law when I did that.
That's a tough one. Yeah. I understand. Sure. Well, you got to do what you got to do, I guess. Yeah. So you raised your son pretty much from that point, or what?
From 5 to 13, yeah, he was with me exclusively.
Oh, wow.
And then, you know, his mom and I had kind of a reunion. We met at an undisclosed location in New Mexico. She'd been through 2 other husbands and had just had a kid. And my son wanted to meet his half-brother, blah, blah, blah. Then the visitation started back up, and eventually, by the time he was 13, he goes, you know, I'd really rather finish high school back in New York rather than here.
Yeah.
And kind of get caught up with that half of the family. And I'm like, yeah, okay. If that's your choice, that's your choice. Have at it.
Yeah.
We'll see you.
You were there.
Oh, I think
Great.
that's a wonderful
That's great.
plan anyway, because you always think, gee, what am I missing? The grass is greener on the other side. But he did have a chance to have both lives.
There's that, and it's
happen,
also,
you
it
know?
gave his mama enough years of not being encumbered by a youngster
Mhm.
to get herself back into nursing school and get a college degree and
Yeah,
Oh,
good.
good.
actually
Good.
make a career for herself. And if she'd been a full-time mom, I don't think she'd have done that.
Mhm.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I'm really focused on those practical applications for the homeschooling. And I'm so happy you brought up the idea of making geometry and trigonometry something that is now adaptable to a real practical application. The only time I had ever seen that happen was Nathan and I visited the School of the New Moon. And they were teaching the children, and they, of course, really, it's a preschool and very young kids, a cooking lesson. And they bake and cook all the time, a meal a day there. And they use the measuring cup and the fractions, and they're really learning about fractions. And I remember stumbling on that in the 6th grade, because I had some really jackass teacher who again taught you academically and and I felt like I didn't understand anything. And I'm saying all of this stuff has to have practical applications, more so now than ever, because the whole school system is changing. Now that's the same thing with drumming in school. They're not going to be learning their instruments in school. So maybe you could talk a little bit about drumming and powwows and music, and how is that integrated into just a home style family way of learning things?
Shelli, that's an excellent question, but I don't have a clue as to what the answer might be.
So you guys didn't
Okay.
sit around jamming? Okay, so when you were growing up...
Except what I've just seen in passing, you know,
Yeah.
families like the Zephyrs that lived here amongst us for years in New York. They were professional powwow people.
Yeah.
And, you know, so they're dragging the kids around while they're still in diapers to all the powwows that they're competing in.
Right.
And, of course, they learn how to sing, drum, and dance real good by the time they're
Crafts.
5 or 6
Yeah,
years old,
Like the Christians.
because of the exposure, the constant exposure.
Like the Christian family, too. You probably know them, right?
Yeah, I know some of them.
Yeah. So do I. Yeah.
Oh, well, that's similar to my family, and I lacked the music teaching because of that. But I sure learned a lot about Mother Earth and the dairy community, and even, you know, living with animals.
Well,
So,
I was real pleased to find out a couple years ago when my oldest granddaughter was trying out what preschool to go to in Alaska, and Waldorf was one of them. And the Waldorf school had an integrated raised bed garden situation for the kids
Yeah.
even in Alaska in the summertime, to start gardens at the summertime daycare and summer school, and then continue on with them in August when they went back to regular class. The next grade that came up would continue to take care of the fall vegetables and put the raised beds to sleep and fertilize them and mulch them and have them prepped for next spring. And I thought, that is really most excellent to
Yeah.
Yeah.
teach them at such a young age that gardening is not a 6-month a year process, but more like 10 months. There's always something that needs to be done in the garden to make it gooder, better, easier, faster next year.
Yeah.
And they were already there doing that at the Waldorf in Anchorage,
Yeah,
Alaska.
that's great. So many
half
things
a
like
dozen
that.
years ago.
Yeah. And your granddaughter is in Alaska. That means your son was.
No, they moved. They moved 2 years ago. They're in Virginia now.
This is your son and his family.
Yeah. He after 9/11, he joined the Alaska Air National Guard.
Okay.
And he enjoyed it so much, and he got rapid promotions because he's a smart guy.
Yeah. Sure.
That he went all in full-time Air Force. Now he's a major.
Oh, gee. Wow.
Nice.
Yeah.
You have to
he's
salute
got
him.
He's got a desk job at the big Air Force base right outside of D.C.
Langley or something? I'm not sure.
No,
Dulles?
no, that's
Air Force.
CIA. Langley is CIA. He's at.
Oh, yeah. That's great. So your kid's doing okay? Your granddaughter, you have a granddaughter? Okay, and they're all having quite a...
Got 2 granddaughters, yeah.
Yeah. Oh, cool. So do you see them once in a while? Do they come
I see them on average about twice a year.
Oh, yeah. Oh, cool.
That's part of why he transferred to the East Coast, is so that he'd have more family time, but so far it hasn't worked out that way. I've seen him twice a year when they lived in Alaska. I see him twice in a year when they live in Virginia.
Yeah. Do you have a way to connect with them and see them on a screen? I mean, do you have that?
Oh yeah, we've been Skyping since they were born.
Okay, so you can Skype and all that. Yeah, so I have Skype too. Yeah, great.
And then FaceTime and
Yeah. Oh, good. All right. Well, I don't want to push you too far. I mean, we've spoken for at least 48 minutes. And if you want to go further, we can, or I can pick this up with you later. I'd like to find out more about...
Well, the one word I want to leave with you, Nathan, is civiculture. And there's become more and more mounting evidence that native Turtle Islanders did more civiculture than we've ever realized before.
Civiculture?
You know, well, it wasn't just, they weren't just roaming around the forest looking for the right kind of mushrooms, the right kind of nuts, and this and that. It was planned and propagated.
Can you spell that?
You'd find some mushrooms that were good to eat, and you'd take some with you where you go and put the spores intentionally in another area where they will, hopefully in a year or two, become another crop of those kind of mushrooms.
This is called civiculture, like civic?
Siva, S-I-V-A, civiculture.
Oh,
like
Siva, S-I-V-A.
Latin, Latin for silva, the forest.
Oh, selva. Or selva is Spanish. Yeah.
Silviculture.
Okay, because that's different than like mycelium or whatever, mushrooms or whatever.
Burning off the hilltops so that the blueberries are better every other year.
Yeah.
Okay, and that's
it's part of civiculture management.
Okay.
Sounds like permaculture in a way, but
it is
in the wild.
It is.
Well, it is permaculture, but it incorporates the forest canopy staying intact.
Right.
I would call it civilizing it.
Yeah.
Because permaculture is kind of first studying it and what's there, and then how do you change things if you want to change it to make it better?
And with this newest technique of LIDAR that they have, they've discovered all over South America how they were growing much more food in the canopy of the forest than they ever thought before. They had what's now called biochar. It's activated charcoal that you make and add to your composted soils.
Right.
To pump up the microbes, and that's being replicated as a way to redo farming in this country. But that whole study of creating activated charcoal and incorporating it into your growing medium so you can maximize your food production. The South American native people have been doing that for thousands of years.
What'd you say, LIDAR?
LIDAR, yeah, low angle radar is an acronym for radar that hangs from the bottom of a plane, and they can shoot right through the trees and get topographical maps that include man-made objects that the trees would normally hide. And LIDAR will shoot right through even a couple inches of dirt. You know, ancient ruins that have been covered up with dirt and
They find things.
plant material for
Yeah.
hundreds of years. This radar will shoot right through that and give you an outline of what an ancient village looked like 2,000 years ago.
Ah. But
Yeah,
this
yeah,
has
really fascinating technology.
And this has something to do with the charcoal? That I mean, I don't understand the
That's how they discovered the charcoal pits in the Amazon. Yeah,
Oh, I see. Ah, okay.
from airplane at 5,000 feet with this new radar technology.
Uh-huh.
It doesn't just pick it up on radar. It actually prints out a graph. It prints out a map for you of what's down there.
Well, Shelley would like to rent that thing for half a day because she thinks that there's
Yeah.
all those buried treasures out here on these little islets all around us. Because the pirates
Costs
used to.
about
come in.
$50,000 an afternoon.
What do you say, Shell? Should we do it?
It's probably worth it. You'll find something. It has already been found in one of the little, mountains here, and the gentleman who found it made an agreement that he would meet with the head of Mexico. It's a number of years ago, but guess what? He never showed up for that appointment. So he got the jewels
Took
out
his
of
stuff
Mexico.
and ran, huh?
Oh yeah, he took his stuff and ran.
Because they would claim it.
This particular little island that we're on, there were very many pirates. In fact, even today,
Yeah.
people pirate here because they can bring their boat in and they're not charged any money. So instead of going into Mazatlan and parking their boat there and being charged heavily, they come and hang out right here on this little island. They stay for a week or two at a time. And there are several nice, big, giant rocks that you could actually live on, okay? And I'm convinced that some of the ships that came here, and there were many, must have buried treasure. But this is still an undiscovered little island. None of these big boys with their fancy equipment have done any kind of radar searching.
Yeah, just little metal detectors and stuff. But I'm not
that's
really
on the
interested
beach.
in it. Yeah. Jim, we could continue a little later. I just don't want to get past your bedtime, and
No.
I don't want to get you too tired out. But unless you want to keep yapping, we can go further. But I'd like to know more about your whole work with with the native people and the practicality of that and in your life.
Last spring, I took 6 weeks to get from Florida to Virginia,
Whoa.
going very, very slowly and following the old native foot trail from Miami up through Cape May, New Jersey,
Oh, gee.
and stayed at one of the islands where Blackbeard the Pirate's last wintertime encampment was,
Yeah, yeah.
which is called Ocracoke. Lovely little island. And when they started excavating Blackbeard the Pirate's wintertime retreat, underneath it, like at least 5,000-year-old Algonquin artifacts.
Oh, gee.
So they now know that Algonquin Indians from as far north as Canada were going as far down the Outer Bank Islands as Ocracoke in North Carolina.
Yeah, North Carolina. I see. Yeah.
Yeah, I just love southern North Carolina, those Outer Banks Islands.
Beautiful. Yeah.
Oh, God. And so many nice, tiny little museums with artifacts up to Wazooby. I took so many pictures, and
Oh, wow.
they tell a much more accurate story down there about the good guy Indians that rescued shipwrecked Europeans and took them in than I've ever seen anyplace else. Naming the names of chiefs and first contact people that really did nice things for shipwrecked Europeans, holding murals on the side of walls and whatnot.
Oh, nice.
To depict things like those rescues.
Wow.
And I've got pretty much all of that shot.
Did your parents try to keep your Indian ancestry more alive through language, or did they really
No.
still believe?
No, they denied the living daylights
it.
out of it
They
hid
right
it.
up
Yeah.
until very, very, very
Yeah.
recently, until my father passed away. When Betsy and I drove through the Six Nations Reserve in Brantford, Canada,
Yeah,
we could not tell we were on a reservation.
yeah,
It was
yeah,
that squeaky clean, lily white,
yeah,
you know,
yeah,
little pink houses all in a row.
yeah,
And,
yeah,
you
yeah.
know, it just looked absolutely white bread.
We've been listening to the late, great Jim Davis, a great Woodstocker, Native American friend. And we want to end the Jim Davis set with a little piece of when we had the two-row wampum campaign in 2013, the 400th anniversary of the first treaty with the Native people. They came, and the Dutch, they came down the Hudson River, and they stopped in Kingston, and they honored the natives, and the Sioux were there, and the Iroquois were there, and Jim was given a pipe. They handed pipe out to some very special activist people. Jim was one of them. Here's what happened when they handed Jim his pipe.
Yes, and the tobacco that we gave to Chief Gasaigo it comes from 800-year-old seed. That is organically grown tobacco. We don't smoke any other kind in a pipe. We have some other native leaders here that we will be gifting pipes. And is Jim Davis here?
Yeah.
I know, yes. Come here. I've been seeing him all day, and then I miss him. Jim Davis is Isapo. He probably doesn't say it that way, but that's the way I've been saying it all my life. I am from Tunxus. Tunxus are from a union of Mohican proper and Isapo families, which came from this area in before the Haudenosaunee decided to be peaceful. So we are presenting to Jim a pipe, and so Jim becomes a member of the circle of the pipe carriers of the two-row wampum as a leader of his people. So would you accept this?
Miigwech. I do. To anyone else contemplating becoming a pipe keeper, and I've had one now for a whole 13, 14 years, I kind of got hoodwinked. It was gifted to me, but the Anishinaabeg rules and regulations took a year or two later to find out. I had to give up killing anything. I couldn't hunt anymore, couldn't fish anymore, much less shoot at a fellow human being. So it's a big commitment. It changes your life when you accept a pipe. Forever. It's that serious a business, regardless of what nation you're from. It's a great honor. Thank you again, Paul, for making such beautiful pipes. And I would say, Hokahe, and welcome to Lenape-Hoking, the west side of the Hudson here. As my cousin from the other side of the river said, we were called the Esopus bands, of which there were 5. And up there in Catskill, where the paddlers are coming down, when they met Hudson and his crew, they came out in canoes to the Half Moon, bearing gifts and clothing and other useful things. They were so generous that Hudson's documentarian secretary nicknamed them the Loving People. As they went back down south the Hudson, they met other Esopus bands, the Warwarsinks, the Warwanoks, the Wampanoags, They weren't always so friendly. But they did get along, and they did make this treaty. And I've been so honored in the last 25, 30 years to have met a lot of the elders, the faith keepers, the lobbyists that have traveled to both Geneva, United Nations, and New York, United Nations. And in honor and respect for some of those who have gone before and are no longer with us, Grandmother Carolyn the Hopi, Thomas Banyaka the Hopi, and Grace Dene, who's still with us. If she were here today, she would have to correct the statement that the Turo is the oldest treaty in Turtle Island, because the Spanish occupied the whole west coast of Turtle Island back in the 1500s, and they made the Treaty of San Juan Hidalgo in the 1580s, and they gave Navajo Nation, Hopi Nation, a guarantee that their lands would be their lands forever, and they gave them a great number of horses and said these are to share with the people. So they bred those horses, and they brought them all the way here to the east and up north, and they got to know the people way back then. So they've had that same mission to spread the word to all the decision makers of the world. You have to protect the water. You have to protect Mother Earth. Our children and grandchildren's lives depend upon it. So we're so glad on this side of the river that these folks are going to such an extreme effort to remind people about those messages that the elders have been trying to get heard for 40, 50 years. Washte, welcome. We chosen it.
So maybe you're getting a better understanding of why we carefully chose those we're gifting the pipes to.